Hi,
Hey
Alyssa.
Marta, how's it going?
All great. How is your day looking
Just
like?
getting started here on the East Coast, so far so good.
Great, Alyssa. Thanks for joining on the podcast. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Amartya Singh, co-founder and CEO of Inflow, a product built by and for modern finance teams using AI and automations. So we are back with the sixth episode of our podcast, Inside the CFO Office, an exclusive channel for finance professionals to know more about the journeys of finance leaders and trailblazers in the CFO office and the biggest challenges that they have faced and solved, and most importantly, their take on the future of finance. So, in today's episode, we are super excited to have Alyssa Shadinger with us as our guest to share a journey with us. Alyssa is an MBA from Wharton and has done a bachelor's in finance and accounting at Stockton University. She has more than a decade of experience in finance, accounting, strategy, and audit with companies of different shapes and sizes. She currently serves as the CFO at Sisense, a leading embedded analytics platform. Prior to Sisense, she has served in various finance leadership roles at Akamai, Linode, Deloitte, and many other firms. As a CFO, she has worked across business finance, AR, AP, FP&A, and controllership, across the finance domain. And that would be a focus area for today's podcast. Would love to go into the depths of her experiences, the challenges that she has faced. I'm sure all the viewers will have a lot to take away from the session. On a personal note, I've had some great discussions with Eliza on the general finance ecosystem, on her experience on finance tech side, and as well as FinFlow, and she had shared some great insights for our use cases of credit risk scoring and accounts receivable using AI and automations. So we had some great discussions. So let's kickstart the podcast,
Sounds
Eliza.
great. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction and thank you for having me on today. I'm really excited for our conversation.
Thanks, Eliza. It's a pleasure for us. So let's start with the first question, right? I mean, your journey has been really interesting, right? And from corporate accounting intern to to audit to the entire journey of becoming a CFO, and it has been really interesting. Your experience has been really interesting. You must have faced a lot of challenges around your role, and you must have seen a lot of ups and downs in terms of the challenges. How has it been? I'd love to know
Yeah.
hear from you.
Yeah, so I have taken somewhat of a winding road, I would say, to the CFO office. I started, like you mentioned, my very first foray into accounting or finance was as an accounting intern. And I was actually only 17 years old when I started my first internship. It was through a school to careers program that my high school did. So I worked for a local telecom company. It was somewhat serendipitous because in high school I was really interested in psychology. I thought I was going to go to school to be a psychologist, but that experience changed my perspective and made me realize that I also really had an interest in business. So I decided to pursue finance and accounting in college instead. In college, I actually really enjoyed my taxation courses, but then after college, the best offers that I had were to join audit teams. So I ended up joining Weiser Mazar, a regional public accounting firm, as an auditor for about 2 years. Then I would say the theme of my career journey has definitely been pivots. After those 2 years, I pivoted into a business operations and internal audit consulting role at Protiviti. I did that for about 3 years, felt like I got a really wide range of experience there, everything from supply chain management through regulatory compliance issues. And then I made my final pivot in the consulting world, and I spent 3 years with both the Pine Hill Group and Deloitte working on IPO readiness and M&A deal advisory projects for both of those companies. And, at Pine Hill Group, got to work with really interesting SMBs and pre-revenue pharmaceutical companies on their IPO journey and capital raising journeys. And then at Deloitte, got to see that at a much larger scale. So one of the largest projects that I had the pleasure of working on is when Takeda Pharmaceuticals merged with Shire Pharmaceuticals. And that was a $50 billion transaction and helped them list publicly in the US for the first time. I want to say it was back in like 2016, 2017. So definitely got to very grateful for my experience in consulting. And I'm glad I started my career there because I feel like in a short period of time, you just get to see such a wide breadth of industries and projects, and you really get to figure out where you want your niche to be. After that, I was recruited to a growth stage technology company, my first startup, if you will, Linode, which was an infrastructure as a service provider. I joined originally as their corporate controller overseeing accounting, and after about a year was promoted to also oversee FP&A and our BI analyst. Very grateful for that experience, helped the company. I was there for about 4 years, helped the company nearly double. We expanded into Asia Pacific while I was there, got to get a front row seat to those initiatives and help the company plan out all of the infrastructure build up in those locations, help them calculate the payback period, and just ultimately decide which cities in the APAC region we were going to open our data centers in. That journey culminated with an M&A transaction. So the company actually was acquired by Akamai Technologies in March of 2022. It was a $900 million transaction. That was a wonderful experience to be able to have a front row seat to a transaction like that at, still fairly early into my career. Was very grateful that our head of finance, we had a VP of finance, a CEO, and a COO that really involved me in that process from day one and let me sit in on all of the management meetings, work very closely with our bankers. And then ultimately, once we went under LOI with Akamai, got to be the key point of contact for most of the accounting and finance conversations and due diligence. And I really feel like that experience, so I stayed on for about 6 months after the integration or after the transaction to assist with the integration. And I believe that really set me up for success in my next role, which was originally joined Sisense as their VP of finance. And after about a year was elevated into the CFO seat. So definitely those experiences really set me up for success because at Linode, we put a lot of infrastructure in place. I know we're going to talk today about automation across FP&A, controllership, finance operations. That really set me up for success in my current role where that skill set is so important to actually helping operate the business.
Got it. Thanks, Alyssa, for taking us through your journey. And one very interesting point was the consulting angle, right? So I am also a consultant. I was at KPMG in the business consulting, strat consulting. I worked on petrochemical side. I've worked in automotive side. I've worked in, in the UPS side. I could really relate with that point because when we work as a consultant, we work on so many diverse business problem statements, right? It just imbibes that capability to don different hats, solve different kinds of problem statements. And I think that has been one place where you started applying those capability to solve diverse problem statements, right? And that was a very interesting point, and I definitely connected with that aspect. And you also talked about the M&A aspect. Would love to, of course, cover the topic of M&A. We'll cover that in a while during the podcast. But your M&A journey has been really fabulous because, as you said, having the front row seat for these M&A deals must have been a huge experience, because it's not only about the learnings, it's also about the mammothness of the deals, the impact that these deals have, right? We are talking about these kind of multi-hundred of million dollars kind of deals. It must have been a great experience. I think that led you towards the becoming a CFO at one point of time, because these learnings really shape you up for the role. So great to know about your experience across the ecosystem. But I think you also covered one pointer about you've worked on the audit side, you've worked on consulting side, you've worked on controllership, you've worked in FP&A, you've worked across across the dimensions and domains. And we spoke so much about accounts receivable as well, and you had such great insights, and we could apply and see how the product is shaping up, what we could do in the product, due to the future for the product. So I think the next question is a little bit about being more diverse. So as a CFO, you work across different segments of business, of finance, right? In the CFO tech play, if you can call it, right? You worked across business finance, you worked across FP&A, AR, accounts receivable, accounts payable, controllership. You have worked across the segment, right? I would love to know, for a CFO or for a finance leader, what is the need for having all-round capabilities? How should a finance executive or a finance leader shape them up towards these kind of working across different domains? And is the 2-3 capabilities that they need? Whether they should have an open-mindedness or something else. What should they do to become good at all these things, and later
Yeah,
on
that's a
become a
great
CFO?
question. I feel very lucky that pretty early in my career, I had a mentor who, asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I had said, some days I could see myself being a partner at a firm, but I really think I would love to be a CFO someday and be able to work for one company and see all of those projects through. They shared with me, they said,
Right.
it would probably be beneficial for you to get different experiences across consulting. You can be a little bit more of a generalist and be, I like to say, dangerous enough to ask questions in most areas across finance, accounting, tax, data analytics. You just need to know enough to be dangerous and ask the right questions, and also recruit the right managers
Right.
and leaders into your group to supplement where you are not the strongest.
Very interesting. I think two major things that you mentioned, right? You have used the word getting dangerous and asking questions. That's a brilliant point. I feel, it's important to be curious. It's important to not limit what you're doing. For example, we were talking about your role across the M&A deals, across CFO. I'm sure that, you must have asked a lot of questions, because otherwise otherwise you will not get the the 360 degrees view of something, right? So asking questions is very important. And you rightly said getting dangerous, that's actually very, very appropriately worded. And the other was, as a leader, for example, one thing you mentioned is that if you are great at something, and it's very great of you to actually see that you're great at something, and you're not great at something, but you want to hire the right set of leaders, you want to hire the right team, learn from them, and become a person who understands things and can have that overall helicopter vision or the binocular vision to see what is going to happen and connect the dots, right? I think that was one very important thing across from what you said. I mean, those are the two major highlights of the role that we had, right? Hiring the leaders and the managers and the users are very executives are very important, because you have the right people in the right positions, then they start delivering, then the overall picture starts connecting. And over to the next question. I think M&A was something that we have been speaking about, and you have led a couple of great deals, right? And been a part of great deals. One deal, $900 million deal, that must have been a great experience. Before that also you were talking about an M&A, right? So there were two deals that we were talking about. Would love to know your experience or your learnings in the M&A. Obviously there are so many angles to it, right? I mean, we are talking about the deal that is going to be constructed, the negotiations around those deals, and I'm sure the deals are also, negotiations are also prolonged. There's so many aspects of deals. I mean, I know it's very short to cover it in a podcast, and we are talking about months and months and hours and days, a lot of things coming into the motion. So negotiations, deal negotiations is one thing that I would love to touch upon. The second thing is the integration that you were talking about. Tech integration is one major thing, and third is culture. Culture is also one major challenge. When two companies get together, culture is typically very difficult to handle. So I think these three things, in my opinion, we can cover, but we can cover other pointers as well. But how has
Yeah.
been your
Yeah, there are
experience
a
with that?
couple, I think probably three things that come top of mind. The first, I would say, from more of like a personal professional standpoint, is just making sure as a finance professional, you also become an expert in the business. Like, and I think most finance professionals, just by nature of the job, you're getting exposure to all the different areas of the business, but making sure you're able to really articulate the overall strategy of the company and how the financial story relates to that. So, because when you become a storyteller and you can actually piece together all aspects of the business for a potential acquirer to explain to them why the business is successful and what really are the magic levers that have made the company so successful today, and where you can see, with the combined resources of a combined company post acquisition, where you think you can double down to go even further together in the future. Basically, how does 1 + 1 = 3? Being able to tell that story, I feel like, is super important. And then, of course, leads into, you mentioned negotiations. I think when you have that really strong story, that puts you in the best position possible to negotiate. What I did learn about negotiations, not only from this experience, but also from some other experiences, and also some of the teachings I learned at Wharton, I think being transparent is something that can be pretty counterintuitive when you're going into a negotiation, because a lot of times you think about a negotiation and a lot of people tend to think just about price. But when you're talking about something as mammoth as combining two companies, and especially two larger size companies, there's a lot more than just the dollar figure that you end up with. Like you said, there's culture, there's, the strategy for the future. So specifically for the Linode and Akamai transaction, culture was really important to the founders. They had run the company for, I believe, about 17, 18 years by the time this transaction happened. So this was their baby. They wanted to make sure someone was going to steward it into the future and take care of the culture that they had built. So that was really important to them. And I think that's why we ended up with Akamai, because Akamai does have an amazing corporate culture and a history of being very people and customer centric.
Got it. Got it. Thanks. I think the most interesting point was the aspect of being a storyteller, right? I mean, typically we think that the storytelling comes from the executives, from the CEO, but it's very important. I mean, when you look at the size of the deal, the storytelling actually percolates from everybody who is involved in the deal, right? Because the story should resonate across multiple people. And obviously, there are different aspects. I'm sure that, your technology, CTO and, VP technology must have gotten involved with a little bit about what the vision is. But binding that story and connecting those dots in the story and building that vision, I think is very important. As you rightly said, another interesting point that you mentioned is that it's very important in these M&A deals to come at in a win-win situation for both the parties. Both of them should come at a middle ground and see that it's a win for both of them, and that's very important point, because then both people, till they are on the table, they are negotiating. I think typically there are high chances of the deal going through, right? So over to the next question. And this is one of my favorite questions with regards to finance softwares, right? We are seeing across finance technologies. Look at financial ERPs like in different accounting software. We are talking about FP&A. You were mentioning that really worked on the FP&A. There are some tools on FP&A. There are tools on accounts receivable, accounts payable. There are tools on expense management. Across the ecosystem, even in reporting analytics, you have tools. So, how has been your experience, and what is typically your take? I mean, companies which have 10 to 100 to a billion dollar kind of a revenue, there's obviously one kind of question that arises, that should we build it, or should we buy it from from the market? So what has been your take, and what has been your experience with finance softwares, and your take on build
Yeah,
versus buy?
that's another great question. I think there's a couple things you need to consider when trying to decide if you want to build versus buy. The first is really what stage is the company at, and also how mature are the back office financial ERP, CRM systems. Because Linode and Sisense, though they are both similar sized companies, when I joined Linode, we were in that like 50 to 100 million range, eventually scaled over 100 million. Sisense is a little bit bigger. It was closer to like over 100 when I joined. Um, but that said, even though they had similarities, they were much different points in their journey. So Linode was mostly a PLG company and had not really invested in the financial infrastructure before I joined the company. So when I joined, we were running on QuickBooks, even though we were operating in 5 or 6 different countries and ultimately 8 different countries. So really quickly, I was told, we need to find an ERP that can handle multi-entity, multi-currency. So we ended up implementing NetSuite at Linode. We had a very lean team, so we didn't really have the expertise or a developer on the team to be able to go build many capabilities internally. So for us, it made more sense to add some functions like Divvy for expense management and reimbursements, and Next Travel for our travel platform that integrated into NetSuite. We also, of course, had our payroll management system, and we used Bamboo for our headcount planning. So that made sense for us. Now, Sisense is a different business model, even though it's similar size. It's a much more sales-led growth motion. When I joined, we already had a very complex integration of Salesforce, NetSuite. We had Coupa. We also had Expensify for our
Got
expense management. And what I realized was, although the team was bigger and we do have some development resources, we can definitely slim down that tech stack. So what we ended up doing so far is we've taken out Coupa and Expensify and replaced both of those systems with Ramp, which resulted in a pretty significant expense savings. And honestly, just made our operations much more streamlined by going from 2 systems down to 1 system. And now, as we look forward, we're
Got
looking
it.
forward to automating more of our accounts receivable process, some
Right.
reconciliations. I did use Flowcast at both companies, which I feel like is a really great add-on for NetSuite, especially if you're trying
Right.
to streamline your close and automate more of your close process. To just maybe answer your question a little more on the build versus buy question. So I think it's, where is your company at today? What size and scale are you, and how sophisticated and how complex are the integrations you already have across your ERP, CRM, and any other key systems? What talent do you have on the team to be able to automate? What's your budget? Do you have budget? If you don't have the talent on the team, is it worth it to bring in a consultant to do something one time that can be automated through NetSuite or through Salesforce? Or does it make sense to purchase an add-on? I think it's really most of the time a cost, resource, and automation question.
Thanks. I think the answer was brilliant. Covered a lot of points, and it was really nice to have the answers, because it actually shows the thought process. Because what you and one of the most important differentiators was a PLG motion and a sales-led motion. I think that thing had defined the difference in approach, right? And for example, in a PLG approach, typically there's a subscription kind of a billing, right? And that's the you have something like a recurring payment kind of a solution. And as our firm grows bigger and bigger, they get into more of kind of a postpaid payment. While in Sisense, you have a sales-led motion, so there are high likelihood that there must be more postpaid billing and lesser of subscriptions, or it might be equally divided. But I think that also boils down to the product that you are using, right? I'm sure from Linode to Sisense, the complications in terms of finance become slightly more, because in a sales rate motion, you are having a certain level of automations in right from the CRM and billing side, and then it comes to the invoicing and the entire invoice to cash side. On the payable side, you will have more dynamic vendors coming in, and then there are a certain level of other technologies which comes in. So I think that level of takeaway was really brilliant, and was really great for our viewers also to understand how from a product-led growth to a sales-led growth, what are the typically challenges in the ERPs that you're using? And you mentioned that you moved to NetSuite, for example, from QuickBooks, and that is typically the challenges that are there in QuickBooks. When you mentioned about multi-currency, multi-country challenges, there are multi-tenant challenges. So NetSuite typically fits the bill. And from a NetSuite, what else can you build it? You mentioned Flowcast, which acts as an enabler on NetSuite and provides a kind of automations. I think one interesting point that you mentioned with regards to the build versus buy was, there was a cost angle. Obviously, there's a resource angle with regards to the talent, whether you have the talent, whether you have the expertise for it, or whether you have the bandwidth for it. You might have 4 or 5 other important things which the tech team has to pick up, whether they should pick up that which is going to drive sales, or which is going to enable the finance automations. And obviously, what kind of automations that you can fit into a company, right? How many people can you take them, and you can ask them to focus on this project. It is going to affect their current work, but it's important for you to do it. We did not cover the finance tech piece, we covered business, finance, ARAP, but I think finance software, the way you explained the different product was really great. And I think one interesting point was you mentioned about Coupa and Expensify, and then you moved to RAM. And I'm sure it must not have been only about the cost, it must have been also about the automations, the efficiencies that come in having a single product for both the process flows, and having the agility in terms of developing, in going ahead and getting go live with the pieces. So I think that was a great answer. I think the next question is a little bit about very close to my heart, and to what we're building is about accounts receivable automation, right? And you briefly touched upon it that at Sisense also you have started with the payables first to solve it, right? And payables and expenses you have solved it with RAM. That is something that you have want to build it, or you want to solve it in the future in accounts receivable, right? I would love to know a little bit, what has been the challenges in accounts receivable, and why is it now that you want to solve for accounts receivable automation? Is it the number of customers, invoices? Is it complicated billing, or what is actually led you to want to have an AR
Yeah,
automation tool?
absolutely. So customers are typically on an annual contract, so it does make it easier to predict your revenue and your cash flow going forward. But it makes it a little trickier to collect because typically these customers are on payment terms. They might have upfront net 30, they may negotiate for quarterly net 30, and then it becomes, you really do need to have a collections team to, unfortunately, when customers are delinquent, follow up with them and understand why they aren't paying. And
Right.
since I've been at Sisense, we've been able to drastically improve our DSO by improving some of those things like our dunning. We've automated our dunning process in NetSuite. We've automated a lot of our billing process. We integrate with Salesforce, so our sales orders come directly over to NetSuite now, create all the necessary documents in NetSuite, and then the way our automation is set up today, we do still need a human to go in and just review the batch for the day and click send. So it's taken out a lot of time, but there still is some manual piece to that process.
Got it. God, I think whatever you said is music to my ears. Yeah, I mean, I totally connect with the problem. For example, invoice automation is one thing. How does your Salesforce and your metering billing platforms connect with your NetSuite and automatically create invoices, sending invoices, dispute resolution, collection for reminders? Obviously, the terms keeps on changing from one customer to another, as you mentioned, right? I mean, the terms, credit terms, contract terms, pricing terms, billing terms, these might keep on changing. One question over here on the challenges when you're working with the collections team. Can you mention some 2 3 challenges that they typically face in today's state
Yeah,
for AI?
certainly. So I think, 2024 has certainly seemed to be better economically, but I think a lot of firms had difficulties in the 2022, 2023 years with just, especially in the US, lots of inflation, lots of uncertainty around the economy. So I think companies were really trying to push off payment as long as possible, get the best payment terms as possible. And some companies are very communicative and will work with us on a payment plan, but unfortunately some are not as transparent, and it just requires a lot of chasing. And even if you send dunning letters, you may not get a response timely, so then that leaves the team with uncertainty and guessing around what they're going to be able to collect within the month. And that's why I'm such a proponent for automated payments in exchange for better terms.
Thanks, Alyssa, for giving such a great answer on the need of AR automation and typically what are the challenges in AR. And I'm sure, I mean, the challenges in automation spread across FP&A and AR and AP. But thanks for the answer. The next question is, I mean, AI. We have been talking about AI across ecosystem, especially AI in finance, right? What has been your take on the evolution and applicability of an AI in finance? Do you see AI actually, making the life and making the productivity, making efficiency much better for finance teams?
I actually do think AI is going to make a big difference in finance and accounting over the next 5 years. I think we've already accounting and finance professionals are already used to this because we've already been adopting like robotic process automation for years now, has been a hot topic in finance and accounting. But now I think AI is just going to leverage up those capabilities and make them even more, less prone to error, more accurate, and open up different use cases. So one I'll talk about two use cases, one that I've done personally and one that I've heard about. So personally, Sisense is an international company. So we have professionals in the US, we have professionals in EMEA, APAC. So our CEO actually sits in EMEA. And so he's 7 hours ahead of myself and most of the finance team. So when he has a question, many times he may need to wait hours until someone comes online to get an answer. So what we did is we have an enterprise license for ChatGPT, and we worked with one of our sales engineers to effectively build a finance chatbot where we have a specific set of financial reports that get fed into the system on a monthly basis. And then our CEO is able to write queries such as like, tell me who our top 5 customers are this month, or tell me which industries have the most concentration in terms of dollars or number of customers, things like that, where if he just needs a quick answer, he's trying to, answer a question for another team or talk to one of our board members, he has that information at his fingertips and doesn't need to wait for someone to come online or spend time digging through a static report. So that has been really helpful. Another use case that I just heard of that I think is honestly pretty brilliant for international companies that have to manage transfer pricing. Both Linode and Sisense have been international, and transfer pricing can be quite tricky and is a pretty niche area of taxation. And typically, your tax advisors will want you to keep that documentation updated on at least an annual or biannual basis. And those engagements can be pretty costly, especially if you have, let's say you have 5, 6, 7 different countries where you need documentation. You're probably, you could be looking anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 per country per update of the documentation. So someone in a community that I'm in mentioned how their team was able to take previous documentation along with all of the standards for the countries where they're working, feed that into ChatGPT, update the documentation themselves, review it, and then just have their tax advisors review it for, you probably have your tax advisor review that in a couple of hours. So instead of paying $10,000 to $20,000 per region, maybe now you're only paying $1,000. So I think you're going to continue to see things like that where it's going to enable teams to do more on their own.
Got it. I mean, I think the first use case I've heard of the first use case, but I'm hearing it for the first time. That's applicability, especially for, I mean, this kind of problem statement where, the CEO wants to know the answer. So has it helped the CEO, and is he happy with the product with him getting the
Yes,
answers?
he's impressed with the bot so far. We're actually looking for a way now. So Sisense, of course, is a embedded analytics platform. So our next phase of the project will be actually using our own AI and chatbot capabilities to basically create a real-time chatbot, since the one we've built so far is really still kind of dependent on those reports that need to be updated every month. If we build it within our own platform that's connected to all of our data warehouses, then we can make this like a true autonomous, always updated source of truth.
Got it. I think one interesting point you mentioned about the data warehouse piece, right? I mean, one problem in that, I mean, since we also have an AI chatbot for finance teams on accounts receivable, where we, take up different kind of reports on DSO, days sales outstanding, aging reports, and give those kind of metrics. What is the kind of forecasting in receivables and forecast in collections, forecast in cash flows? One of the major challenges that we have seen is the noise in the data lake that you're preparing, right? Because I mean, there are so much data, right? Every part of the data is not very important for the data calculation. Have you also seen those challenges in terms of the noise in the data while building those, the models?
We have a data engineering and data analytics team at Sisense, and they take data governance very seriously. So one of the things we do is like we make sure we follow a standard naming convention for all of the fields within our system. We make sure we always have updated definitions for all of the data fields. But it certainly is, if you're not a large enough enterprise where you don't have teams dedicated to data governance and data analytics, I think that can certainly be a challenge.
Got it. And the second use case is something that I've not heard. It's a brilliant application. I totally get why, application of AI will be very helpful in the transfer pricing arrangement, because that typically firms business, especially international businesses, as you said, it find it very difficult because solely taxation policies are different, the government's policies are different, currency conversions are different, how you are recording it in two different accounting softwares or the same accounting software in two different countries is different. So it's a big challenge that firms face. Really would interest to know offline how you have done it, but I think that is a great application of AI, really seeing you being at the forefront of AI application. So we are at the last question of the podcast, and this is something a little bit more personal. I know you have gone from intern to executive to a manager to a finance leader to a CFO right now. So what would be your advice, 2-3 pointers of advice for finance professionals to become a
Yeah,
CFO in the future?
I would say first is one of the things that I love about the finance realm is that there's so many different opportunities. So I would just say always stay open-minded. And if you're not really enjoying what you're doing right now, make sure to talk to your peers and folks who are doing different types of accounting and finance and find out, where your interests lie and what will be more well aligned with what you want to do. And then I would also say don't be afraid to ask for what you want. I think earlier in my career, I was a little impatient and I wasn't understanding like why people weren't giving me more opportunities. And then again, someone gave me the good advice of, well, people aren't mind readers. No one's going to know that you want to do something unless you actually go tell them that this is your goal and this is, something that you would like to get experience in. And I think that has been really career changing for me to just get that confidence to, go out and ask people and understand that the worst they can say is no. Like people aren't going to say yes all the time, but at least now you've planted the seed and you let people know what you're interested in and what kind of opportunities you're open to. And I think that just opens so many doors for people.
Obviously there are so many opportunities to come in, and one way to do it is that a problem statement comes in and you're going to solve it. Either it's part of your job description and you're going to do it, and or the other thing is you face challenges on a day-to-day basis, right? But one other thing is about upskilling. What do you think is the importance of upskilling and constantly learning about stuff, constantly studying stuff? How important is that for finance
I think it's
professionals?
really important, especially today, like we were just talking about AI. So I don't think AI is going to replace as many jobs. I think some people have this fear that AI is going to replace jobs. And I do think it will automate a lot of low value add tasks. But I think really the winners in this next iteration of the workforce are going to be people who can work in synergy with AI and leverage AI to have the most impact and be able to come up with these new use cases. It's really important to kind of take that leap and get as much knowledge up front as you can so that you're ready when the opportunity presents itself to make a pivot.
Got it. Thanks, Alyssa, for sharing your advice for finance professionals. Had a blast, and we come to the end of the podcast. Had a blast recording it. This was the longest podcast that I have ever recorded. I spoke on such a lot of things. Thanks for being a sport and sharing your experiences, sharing your journey.
Definitely. I like to share thoughts and tips on my LinkedIn. So feel free to add me, Alyssa Shadinger. And also, if you're interested in modern analytics for modern apps, please check out sisense.com. And just want to say thank you again for having me on the pod. This has been awesome. Really enjoyed the conversation and look forward to keeping in touch.
Thanks, Alyssa, for being a part of the podcast. All the viewers, thanks for joining in and listening to us. And I hope that we've added a great value to your understanding and what you can expect and what you need to do for your future. Stay tuned for the next episode, and thanks for joining in. Bye.